Hello again, everybody. This is Jason Powers. Thought I'd do a Sunday broadcast. This is going to be a long, particular broadcast as I have it planned. Well, I didn't plan it that well, but I think there'll be a lot of nuggets in this. But it'll be I think an hour plus when I get done with it. There'll be a break in the middle there, music break. I decided to put something together. So today we're going to do a piece from James Corbett. We're going to look at Michael Singer and his recent post on Substack. We're going to follow up on a Pfizer story and or the idea of their great, I guess you could say, fraud that we've been living for a number of years. Just overall, there's a host of things to discuss. Plus, we'll have some clips from our favorite evil people in the world. When I say favorite evil people, you'll know who I'm talking about. The Klaus Schwabs and the Yuval Hararis, and but also some hopeful or people who are trying to wake people up. Now they're looking at it from their point of view, so we'll let them discuss it when we get to that point. Anyway, there will be a host of clips and me trying to not butcher people's work and analysis, but there's a lot to go over today. So sorry. Unfortunately, when I load up, Brave is not a good browser to use with Sprecher, I've found out. But I still use Brave. And by that I mean if you open a tab in Brave, it interrupts Sprecher. So, without further ado, I'll go into first. I guess we're going to start with Michael Singer. I'm going to read... This is from Milton. He has a quote. I'm going to just read the quote and maybe in the final paragraph. It's called One Giant Fraud. And he says, justice must be done for the response to the COVID-19. Our democracy depends on it. And the quote he cites at the beginning. And one day, you'll see that everything has changed and changed completely under your nose. The world you lived in, your nation, your people, is not the world you were born in at all. The forms are all there, all untouched, all reassuring. The houses, the shops, the jobs, the meal times, the visits, the concerts, the cinemas, the holidays. But the spirit, which you never noticed because you made the lifelong mistake of identifying it with the forms, is now changed. Now you live in a world of hate and fear, and the people who hate and fear do not even know it themselves. That's Milton Mayer. They thought they were free. So... And he goes on and talks about the long idea of what we've been going through in terms of the cult and the cheers is spread, and then I think in lockdown proponents, he got banned off Twitter. So I'm gonna here's a part of and this will lead into what I'll talk to later about the fifth generation warfare. Quote from Singer. These crimes were enabled by a media apparatus that, every step of the way, abused language to hijack human empathy, wrapping tyranny in sweet-sounding words of communitarianism. We're all in this together. My mask protects you. Your mask protects me. Follow the science. Just stay home. But all this manipulative propaganda to which citizens were subjected, none has been more insidious than the attribution of these countless harms to the pandemic. Governments, NGOs, nonprofits, think tanks, even leading journalists and scientists have all indulged in the collective fantasy that these policy decisions were inevitable, the harms they cause attributable to natural forces beyond their control. Of course, none are really so vacuous as to believe that global famine and the permanent shuttering of millions of small businesses were caused by a respiratory virus with an infection fatality rate under 2%. It's 0.27%. That was as of early last year. But that's the point. The attribution of lockdown harms to the pandemic is not intended as an argument. It's intended as an order. And then that's from him. And let's see here. I'm going to go down. So he talks about the leaders in charge. The majority have generously assumed that their elites don't understand the enormity of what has transpired with the response to COVID-19. I believe that, in some cases, the evidence points to a darker possibility. They know, they just don't feel any social or financial incentive to care. But the particular motivations of individual actors are not crucially important, at least for the time being. The key point is the abominable result. For 2 years and counting, the world has adopted a swath of unprecedented sweeping mandates pioneered by the Chinese Communist Party on overtly fraudulent pretenses, and the vast majority of elites have not acknowledged that it has even happened, much less that there was anything unusual about doing so. No one has yet been implicated in these crimes because, as of yet, no one has even looked. They all let it happen. They are all implicated. So, true enough. That's where we're at with that. And that's from Michael P. Singer, and he's on Substack. There's this long article about Pfizer. Well, it's not about Pfizer. It's about Pfizer is one of the leading things. This is from Rebecca Strong via Medium. The Anatomy of Big Pharma's Political Reach, and it's a good read. There's a lot to be discussed, talking about the history or in this historical implications of certain agencies, particularly the FDA, the CDC, and how they buy studies through the medical journals. For example, there's a citation here. When the New England Journal of Medicine published 73 studies of new drugs over the course of a single year, they found that a staggering 82% of them had been funded by pharmaceutical companies selling the product. 68% had authors who were employees of that company, and 50% had lead researchers who accepted money from a drug company. So that they use the medical journals to push or to sell product to people, and people believe that when you start digging into their disclosures and whatnot, you find out that there is it's just drug hustling using a medical journal to justify the outcomes. So, and next thought from this one. According to a 2013 research conducted at the University of Arizona College of Law, even when pharma companies aren't directly funding the research, company stockholders, consultants, directors, and officers are almost always involved in conducting them. A 2017 report by a peer-reviewed journal, the BMJ, British Medical Journal, also showed that about half of medical journal editors receive payments from drug companies, with an average payment per editor hovering around $28,000. Which, if you're a what would you say? If you're a factory worker making $14 an hour, that's what an editor gets from each payment from to the editor of these journals. Just so you know. I've found that is probably the case with at least one particular editor that works for the New England Journal of Medicine, and we'll leave it at that for now because, I can talk about him, but it's sidetracking. So, also, next article from Hedge is Pfizer hired 600 employees due to large increases of adverse events, and this is the document from the site is the Public Health and Medical Professionals for Transparency. So it's the phmpt.com. So you can go there. Right now there's 166 documents available that have been released by Pfizer regarding their trials. And so there was a host of information in here tied to the vaccine and whatnot. So pretty substantial stuff. I think I put that link in the description. So we'll move on. I'm trying to go through these quickly. So another one from Substack. This is from Robert Malone, who he talks about defeat the mandates in LA. He says, I'm just going to read part of this. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I come to you with an open heart as a physician committed to healing, bringing 3 simple words, each word rings like a bell in the soul of honest people. Integrity, dignity, community. Integrity is a commitment to truth in what you say, how you live, and how you treat others. Dignity flows from respect for ourselves, for each other, and for the world we live in. Community is what binds us together to each other and gives our lives purpose and meaning. St. Augustine, the doctor of the Roman Catholic Church, famously said, "The truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Let it loose. It will defend itself." So there's many said. He goes through this at the end. I'm going to go down here. Regarding the genetic COVID vaccines, the science is settled. They are not working to prevent infection, replication, and spread of Omicron, and they are not completely safe. The vaccines were designed for a different virus, the Wuhan strain. Whether they made sense for protecting our elderly and frail from the original virus is irrelevant. So let's stop arguing about that. We must look forward. Correct. Going backwards and saying, this is for this or that or whatever. And the more and more you dig inside this, the more and more you realize that even the vaccines were prepped and ready based upon trialing that they may have done overseas and on the Uyghurs in China. So we maybe, we were being set up for this, which is part of the next piece. I think I'm going to go ahead to, I'm going to go to the Corbett report. So hold on here a second. I got to load this back up to where I think it's important. There was a question at the outset, but I'm going to move back to that point and we'll let it go from there, and I'll shut up for a while. So.
You claim that virtually everyone on the planet is a combatant, and where the battleground smolders between our very ears. You were speaking about a little-known concept called fifth generational warfare that you state is characterized by full-spectrum dominance over every single aspect of our lives, our movements and our interactions, our transactions, even our innermost thoughts and feelings and desires. Can you speak to how, in their efforts to wage fifth generational warfare, the global oligarchs, misleaders, and powers who shouldn't be have weaponized narrative framing that weakens our cognitive defenses and subjugates largely oblivious masses? What role do our cognitive biases play in this manipulation, and can we devise strategies and tactics to become cognizant of those biases and mitigate their effects?
It's quite the question. Well, maybe I can solve cancer and find world peace while we're at it. Well, all right, let me try to break this down, because this truly is such an important question on the most basic level of what it is, the situation we find ourselves in. So I've attempted to articulate this a number of times over the years by, for example, calling this World War III. We are in World War III. It is already happening. It just looks nothing like warfare as we've known it before. And as you note, I just this past weekend released an editorial that has not received enough attention, I think, yet, but hopefully more people will catch on to it. It's called Your Guide to Fifth Generation Warfare. And in this attempt to articulate this idea, I'm picking up on an idea that's been floating around for a few decades now in academic-y type of think tanky circles about generation warfare. So this goes back to a 1989 Marine Corps Gazette article that was co-authored by William S. Lind and a couple of others, talking about the modern era of warfare, which they define as being post-Treaty of Westphalia, 1648, that they state sort of coalesce the idea that nation-states have a virtual monopoly on warfare in this modern age of warfare. Before that point, you had religious warfare and tribes and ideological warfare of different sorts, but from that point forward, it was the modern era of warfare, and it was nation-state versus nation-state over land and territorial sovereignty and what have you. And in that context, they came up with this idea. There were 4 generations of warfare that we've seen. So going from the first generation and first iteration of this being the old tactics of line and column and sort of everyone lining up and firing at each other, that quickly evolved into the second generation warfare of indirect fire, mass movement of troops that was in response to various military developments, rifled muskets, breech loaders, barbed wire, etc. You get to the third generation of warfare, which has non-linear movement, like maneuver and infiltration and it was developed in response to the increase in battlefield firepower that was brought to bear in World War I. And then they stated, okay, so now we've arrived at fourth generation warfare, which is now no longer nation state versus nation state. Now it often involves uncertain actors, nation states versus guerrilla insurgencies. It's not necessarily military men with guns in their hands. Now it involves information operations and psychological operations and other sorts of effects like that. And some people have picked up on that idea and run with it and said, well, okay, now we're in fifth generation warfare. And so I just picked up on that concept. Don't get hung up on the term. I am not an adherent to this as the defining category of existence. What I'm trying to paint is a picture of warfare that doesn't look like men in camo with guns in their hands pointing guns at people. That's not what this warfare is. This warfare is an attempt to control the citizenry of the planet Earth by each individual nation state against their own citizens primarily, which again does not fit into our framework of what warfare looks like, because post-Treaty of Westphalia you have nation-state sovereignty, and so no other nation-state can come in and dictate what a nation-state can do within its own territory. But now nation-states are more concerned about consolidating their control over their own citizenry. So what does that look like? What form does that take? And I identified several different areas that this warfare is happening on. The information warfare plane, the neurological warfare plane, which is a new front that's opening up given the technological advances that have been made in recent years, biological warfare, not just what we've seen over the past couple of years, the specter of the level 4 biolabs and whatever may be leaking out of them, etc., but also the idea of weaponization of pharmaceutical interventions to actually cause medical problems in the population, or the genetically modified organisms that are being essentially altering the genome of the biosphere in an open-air experiment that they always say is controlled, but always, oops, it turns out this organism escaped and we have no control over it, or things along those lines. And we also have economic warfare, which I think everyone is probably feeling at this point as the inflationary pressures start to rise, but that's the price of freedom or something like that, according to Biden and others. So once we start to contextualize it in the right way and understand that we are essentially the targets of this warfare, and it isn't necessarily Russia that is targeting Americans, it is to some extent the American government that is targeting Americans for control over primarily their mental space. So that if you can control a population to the point where they will do what you say, you don't really need the people with guns pointed at their head telling them what to do. You just implant it in their messaging. You just have people in certain positions of authority, like a Fauci or whoever, who gets to dictate, okay, now everyone will do this, now everyone will do that. And people can be led along in a system of control that is more refined and complex than anything yet developed, and which is being aided by the technological advances that I alluded to earlier. So that's the big overview of this subject, and I hope you can understand there's many pieces to this puzzle, but I think we need that bigger picture of what the puzzle is forming so that we understand and contextualize those pieces as we put them in place. Having said that, that's a big mouthful, so if you want to follow up with certain things.
Yeah, and before we go any further, James, we did link to your fifth generation warfare article at Vermont.
So, sorry, and let me see if I can get my broadcasts better. So, I saw an interesting, this is a visual that someone put together on, it's a Paradigm Shift Substack, and I downloaded it, and I'm going to go through it real quickly. And it kind of explains, let's just say this is another high overview of what's going on, but this is what they call the G3P, which is Global Public-Private Partnership, so that's why it's called G3P. It's kind of like all the other acronyms that you're going to stumble across, but I think it's a pretty good, this is a very good summation of what's going on and how they interconnect and how we're dealing with it, and the things we see and the things we don't see. So you have this okay, everything is about money. Let's just clarify something. When I say everything is about money, when I say everything's about money, it's about resources that are tied or attached to financial transactions, economic, as Corbett just pointed out with the inflation and this and that. And the other thing, weaponization, economic warfare, financial warfare, transaction warfare. Those are all actually a part of like when you talk about the fifth generation, you're talking about a broad spectrum of what's called, at least in some terms, asymmetric hybrid warfare. So asymmetrically means that one side has more information, more tools. It's kind of like asymmetric information when you talk about transactions between, say, for example, something we're really familiar with, a used car. So the people that are selling you a used car know more about that car than you do. You're buying it based upon the faith that you trust in them. So from they have asymmetric information. They know more about the situation than you do. Kind of like, for example, a company, say from China, who wants to list on a exchange like the New York Stock Exchange. Now they know more about their company, and they know more about what their dealings are, and they know more about what they want out of the situation than even the stock exchange. Now, this is called, this is where due diligence is supposed to come into play. So in order for them to list on a stock exchange, the stock exchange people and the SEC and whatnot, the governmental actors, are supposed to vet that company and make sure that they are legitimate, they're a good investment. When I say good investment, they're an investment option that is based upon something tangible. They're producing something that so people aren't being huckstered. Well, there was an article recently pointing out that many of the Chinese listings have been duping and suckering investors, and the people that are involved in it are listing on a stock exchange, then taking people's money, and then they're bouncing. And in other words, they run up the stock, they sell out, they cash out, and then they leave, and poof, and they vanish without a trace, leaving other people who invested in that company holding the shit. They're not the only ones doing it. That's just an example. So I'm using that as an example for the asymmetric situation. Somebody else knows more information about what's going on. So anyway, getting back to this diagram. So at the very top you have what's called this Bank of International Settlements. I'm going to just read through this verbatim pretty much. They ultimately control the money supply and thus global markets, trade, and national economies. So they control the winners and losers. They're picking winners and losers. The Bank of International Settlements is actually above what they call the central banks. Central banks coordinated by the BIS. Coordinated. So we know about the U.S. Central Bank. We know about the European Union Central Bank. We should know about Russia and all these other state actors that have, quote unquote, a central bank, a centralized source where money. The U.S. Fed, the Federal Reserve, is the largest, and currently because of the reserve currency position that the United States holds, which is waning due to the fact that, there's a long history to that, but going off the gold standard, doing lots of other things, the petrodollar replacing that, etc. Central banks, they called it going direct. That was actually a BlackRock euphemism that was painted in a paper that they wrote in August of 2019. And as we all are aware, BlackRock has over $10 trillion in assets under management. And they own a significant portion, usually anywhere between 5 to 9%. They sometimes owe 10% of a company, but for the most part, they own a substantial portion of all these Fortune 500 companies, along with Vanguard, along with State Street, along with most of the other major investors. So institutional investors own, in many cases, 80 to 90% of a major corporation. So it's a big club, and you're not in it. So the central bank is they're doing the direct funding government spending. Monetary policy has effectively become fiscal policy. So then these are the policy makers. This is the part where the policy is all being driven from top down, centralized sources, and in many cases beyond politicians. So the next layer of this cake that they put together is called so these are your These are the people that we see on TV that are these powerful conferences, the World Economic Forum, the Council for Foreign Relations, where Joe Biden said you got 6 hours. So the Council of Foreign Relations was put together in 1922. Then you have the Club of Rome, which is a little group of, they supposedly are working on, they care about people, they don't. Chatham House, Rockefellers, think tanks, and global representative groups. So these formulate the policies to achieve the G3P objectives, resource allocation determined by the BIS and central banks, but they are working in partnership, quote unquote, with think tanks and other representative bodies to convert that into global political policy. So those are all your policymakers. Those are the people that these are your. And when you think about all these other little groups and central banks and stuff like that, well, who runs the central banks? Who is tied to central banking? It isn't just the Rockefellers. There's also the Rothschild. There's families that are located in certain places around the world that are highly influential. I'm sure there is one in China too. I'm not going to pretend to know who that is, but I'm sure they have some. I don't think it's just Xi Jinping. It's there's there's families over there. There are powerful families that have certain aspects of ownership of this and have wealth beyond our wildest dreams and imaginations. So then you have the policy distributors. So, you have people that are making these edicts from on high, but then they pass these edicts on down through the policy distributors. So the United Nations, who likes to run their mouth, the IMF, the IPCC, the World Bank, the World Health Organization, philanthropists like the Gateses, global corporations. We've recently run into a global corporation pushing transgenderism, Disney, and then you have these NGOs who always talk of NGOs that goes back to Gates too. These organizations and bodies take policy directives from the policymakers and distribute them to the policy enforcers. National governments, and selective scientific authorities. So think of national governments, you're talking about the NHS, police, military, courts, local governments, statutory agencies. And the authorities can be SAGE, the JCVI, the CDC, the FDA, the NIH, the AMA, the American Medical Association. The policy enforcers exploit or work with the selected scientific authorities to justify the policies they are required to enforce. In other words, they justify these policies could be cockamamie as hell, but then these the policy enforcers are essentially technocrats. They're your technocrats that work to come up with reasoning to support the money that's coming from the top. They're paid off. They're, like I said, they're the technocrats. And then you have the policy propagandists, which of course is the mainstream media, the fact checkers like PolitiFact and all these others, social media platforms, hybrid, and then they call them hybrid warriors. So one of the people that was mentioned, who was on Joe Rogan, was talking about the 77th Brigade, the anti-hate campaigners, and then the propagandists and hybrid warfare specialists are tasked with convincing the public to accept and hopefully believe in the policies. They use psychological manipulation, disinformation, misinformation, censorship, and propaganda. The very things they talk about amongst the public that the public shouldn't be doing, they're doing. It's all this narcissistic projection. This is all driven by people with sociopathic and narcissism and psychopathic ends and means, which we'll discuss in a minute. Policy subjects. So this is the public to us. We are the subjects of the policy, which cascades down through the GPPP system. We largely pay for the system through taxation and public borrowing. The system is designed to exploit us, but we are increasingly unnecessary component as the GPPP look to seize the global commons. Correct. These people want to control everything and everybody. They could care less what we think or say or do. They just want to control. And speaking of which, we'll go to our favorite minions, and Actually, you're going to hear from Elon Musk in this. I can't even talk today, but we'll play a few of these clips, and that follows up with this, and then we'll come back to this diagram again.
And this leads me to the fourth difference of this technological revolution. It changes not only what we are doing, it changes us. Because it's a fusion of our physical, digital, and biological spheres. It's an integration of those spheres. Just think of sensors planted into our brains. The opportunities are immense, and we have to prepare. I created the community of global shapers as a means, as a force to shape our common future. This engagement of the young generation never has been more important than now, where we have to face the consequences of the pandemic of COVID-19 for creating a more resilient, a more sustainable, and a more inclusive world. You are calling for the international community to safeguard vaccine equity, to respond to COVID-19 and prevent future health crises. Nobody will be safe if not everybody is vaccinated. Young people, you are rallying behind the global wealth tax to manage the alarming surge in wealth inequality. You are calling for programs that help you and young progressive voices join government and become policymakers. To limit global warming, you are demanding to halt to coal, oil, and gas exploration. You are asking firms to replace any corporate board directors who is unwilling to transition to cleaner energy sources. You are championing an open internet and a 2 trillion digital access plan to bring the world online and prevent internet shutdown. And you are presenting new ways to minimize the spread of misinformation, and you want to combat dangerous extremist views in the internet. On stakeholder capitalism will be the key.
So you get all that. That's just 3 minutes of Klaus Schwab. You can see how he's projecting that onto all the youth and saying that they want this, they want this. See, that way they don't have to take any responsibility for all the evil actions they're doing. They'll say, well, you are the ones who wanted this. You wanted a climate change, and you wanted power and control, and you... I can't do Klaus Schwab very well, but, you know, all you have to do is think of an evil Bond villain, and he's just sick, and he's only a third-level policymaker, but I'm sure he has his connections, he does, to the central banks and controlling certain things, but that's just the kind of good-hearted soul he is, by trying to, you know, saying, oh, we want the youth. It's always about the youth. They have to get to the children. They got to get to the most gullible people in the world to sell them a bunch of shit that they aren't going to ever reap the benefit of. That's always the beauty of being one of these old assholes who, you know, They know that they were once gullible as youth, and they were manipulated, so they want to manipulate youth again. You know, they don't want anybody to grow up with a free conscience because they don't think enough of us are worthy of that. So, speaking of which, first we're going to play Elon Musk. Now, this was from, I think 2017 or 2018, so just bear with me on this.
There will be fewer and fewer jobs that a robot cannot do better. Okay. What to do about mass unemployment? This is going to be a massive social challenge. And I think ultimately we will have to have some kind of universal basic income. I don't think we're going to have a choice.
Universal basic income.
Universal basic income. I think it's going to be necessary.
So it means that unemployed people will be paid across the globe.
Yeah.
Because there is no job, machine, robot is taking over.
That's simply and I want to be clear that these are not things that I think that I wish would happen. These are simply things that I think probably will happen. And if my assessment is correct and they probably will happen, then we need to say, what are we going to do about it? And I think some kind of a universal basic income is going to be necessary. Now, the output of goods and services will be extremely high. So with automation, there will come abundance. There will be almost everything will get very cheap. I think the biggest. I think we'll just end up doing a universal basic income. It's going to be necessary. The harder challenge, much harder challenge, is how do people then have meaning? Like a lot of people, they derive their meaning from their employment. So if you don't have, if you're not needed, if there's not a need for your labor, what's the meaning? Do you have meaning? Do you feel useless? That's a much harder problem to deal with.
Yeah, and then here's Klaus Schwab's chief pinhead. I'm going to let him talk for 2 minutes. Yuval Noah Harari.
I think once you're superfluous, you don't have power. Again, we are used to the age of the masses of the 19th and 20th century, where you saw all these successful, massive uprisings, revolutions, revolts. So we are used to thinking about the masses as powerful. But this is basically a 19th century and 20th century phenomenon. I don't think that the masses, even if they somehow organize themselves, stand much of a chance. We are not in Russia of 1917 or in 19th century Europe. What we are talking about now is like a second industrial revolution, but the product this time will not be textiles or machines or vehicles or even weapons. The product this time will be humans themselves. We are basically learning to produce bodies and minds. Bodies and minds are going to be, I think, the two main products of the next wave of all these changes. That is optional. Again, and if you think about it from the viewpoint of the poor, it looks terrible because throughout history, death was the great equalizer. The big consolation of the poor throughout history was that, okay, these rich people, they have it good, but they're going to die just like me. But think about a world, say, in 50 years, 100 years, where the poor people continue to die, but the rich people, in addition to all the other things they also get exemption from death. Once you really solve a problem like direct brain-computer interface, when brains and computers can interact directly, for example, to take just one example, that's it. That's the end of history. That's the end of biology as we know it. Nobody has a clue what will happen once you solve this. If life can basically break out of the organic realm into the vastness of the inorganic realm, and you cannot even begin to imagine what the consequences will be because our imagination at present is organic.
So there's the future that they have predicted. So that's where they get with the own nothing and be happy, because they really don't think of the masses, which is me, you, and anybody who will dare to listen to this broadcast. They don't. They just look at us as, and they've said it, in so many hackable animals, useless eaters, low IQ, and you see how he wants to bifurcate society. There will be the super elite who think that because of how they want to build their consciousness towards a centralized or generalized intelligence that is being worked on through AI and stuff, that they will live on for hundreds of years. for example, Jeff Bezos with his life extension that he wants to. He's working was it Los Altos in California. He wants to extend life to 150 years or so. At least that's the initial project that he decided to sign on to in, I think, July of 2021. So it's relatively new. It's less than a year old. It hasn't even been a year yet. That's what they're working on. They're working on that idea, the concept of, and of course, they rolled out these mRNA vaccines. They didn't just roll them out for no reason. It had nothing to do with, of course, Klaus Schwab says everybody shall get the vaccine. Not everybody. They didn't get it. You can guarantee Klaus Schwab didn't take the vaccine. You ever see him? You won't see him roll up his sleeve for nobody. He won't do anything. They are just too important, and if they do stuff like that, it's all for show. They put on it's got to be a big display of, so that all the youth and all the dumbasses out there that'll still believe this stuff. And they keep on, there are people that are so dumb that they just accept what, because they're there's where the incentivization comes in with the universal basic income, because, what is the meaning? And Yuval has talked about, video games and some kind of virtual reality. That's where the metaverse comes in with Mark Zuckerberg. There are people that, because they have no meaning in life, which is their fault, it is. If you don't have meaning in life, that is ostensibly your fault, because you can find meaning. I know certain people don't have the, it's not just your work. There's more to life than just punching a clock at a warehouse. That is absolutely true. That is just a mechanism for you to continue to pay bills and generate a subsistence. You have other time. Remember, your ancestors long ago had to work 14 hours a day, and they were working 14 hours a day just to keep alive under a feudalistic system, which is what these people want to do to you again, by the way. They want you as a feudal serf. And they don't care whether they have AI, robotics, and stuff like that. Have you seen all these robots yet? Do you think these robots are going to actually, they're trying to install a system that they are nowhere near capable of putting in place. But they can if they get rid of the variables, which is you. You're the variable. The less of you there are, the easier it is to do this. That's what their plan is. Through whatever mechanism, through the warfare that they're trying to install. Anybody who resists, they're going to get rid of, at least initially, so that they can get the compliance. That's the reason why they're projecting and blackmailing people by saying you're spreading disinformation or misinformation. If you have a freedom of thought, they don't want you out here in this world, because you may rally the troops. They don't, as Novell was talking to, he's like, this is no longer like the 19th and 20th centuries where the poor people can rise up. They don't want you rising up. These people are so full of themselves that they see themselves as just gods amongst us. They think that there's so much. They are mortal. They will not survive this. They think that they're better than us in every way, shape, or form. They may be able to have better intellectual arguments. They may have bigger luxury yachts, which is another reason why they dislike us. They don't like poor people flying planes. They don't like poor people at the airport. They despise even seeing us. They don't even like us to be on social media. They definitely don't like us being on social media and making fun of them. That's where some of this comes from. It's a resentment. It's a hatred. It's the mocking. Rich people don't like to be mocked. And when they get mocked, they get vengeful. And then that's what they're doing with this. And they've been planning this for a long time. They have subtly, like Michael Singer said, they just don't care. And that's what's really coming out of this, is they don't care. And because they used the pandemic to seize power from the entire Western world, the whole Westphalian model, seized power back from the nations. They put their puppets in place. That's what the World Economic Forum did. They got the puppets at all the major stops. So even though France is having an election, and now it's Macron versus Le Pen, if the people there can't keep that election straight, and I don't know anything about Le Pen, but Macron is a World Economic Forum puppet, and Le Pen evidently has not been a part of that little system. If people give a shit about their nation state, then they should probably vote for nationalist. If you don't care about your culture, then go ahead, vote for the World Economic Forum puppets. That includes Joe Biden. It includes the Morrisons and the before she was replaced, Merkel and of course Boris Johnson, and all around the world, Jacinda Ardern and all these other idiots, and of course Trudeau in Canada. So there, I just named them off all on the top of my head, and they're all tied to the Western powers, and that isn't the only place that they're located. So that's a vast array of the global public-private partnership, and this is just fascism and communism mashed up together, as many of other people have conjoined them. So the fascism is the corporations, and the communism is the fact that communism is just feudalism with a 19th century spin on it. But they're going to do techno-communism. So, that's the whole thing with everybody will have the UBI, the same level of income. As long as you behave yourself and obey the system, you'll continue to get your gruel or your little bit of, you'll just be kept just above statistics. And of course, they're going to cut your power. You're going to keep your mouth shut. You're going to stay inside when they tell you to. Let the robots do all the farming. Let the robots and the AI take over the world. And then of course, they're not going to keep us around. They're going to get rid of people. And I know people say they would never be that way. How can you be so stupid? It's like, no, I'm not being stupid at all. That's exactly what they're after. They're not, like I said, they're not looking to have many more variables here than they need to. It sounds conspiratorial. It sounds ignorant. It sounds crazy. But think about it. Have they really shown any sympathy at all whatsoever for the people? They can kill off 100 million. They've been doing this to Africa. Africa has been a continent where Bill Gates has gone over there and vaccinated and caused all kinds of havoc and chaos and trying to reduce birth rates. They don't like people to reproduce. These people think that they're better than everything, and if you have high enough IQ, they pre-select you through their talent recruiting program. They find somebody who's got enough IQ, who doesn't have a lot of moral qualms. That's where they recruit from the youth or recruit from within to build up their roster of people that they can put in positions of power, military, political power, to run these operations. And they don't care what they look like. They just need somebody that likes to go along, and as long as you keep your mouth shut and don't, it's a cult. It's just basically a rich cult. They don't care what kind of, they don't care if you know what their peccadillos are anymore. They've come out, they pulled off the mask and told you exactly who they are. And they've been saying this for a long time. Noel wrote his books, over the last decade or so. Just nobody thought of anything of him because he seemed like just like a quirky, stupid history professor. Stupid in terms of just somebody who's just a quack. But he knows what asses and boots to lick and asses to kiss. So he's gotten where he is. So let me go back here to Corbett for a second. So. Bear with me. Well, actually, let me. There's just two clips here. I'm going to play one's from Jonah Goldberg, the Chicago thinker, and then I'm going to play another one from Dr. Malone on Tucker. So these are interesting, tied to media. So I'll just let them play.
Talk about A to C. They now think that if only the media had told us about the laptop at the time, as the kid yesterday was suggesting, which I don't buy his, theory, that Trump would have won. But for the censoring of the New York Post, Trump would have won. And I think it's a preposterous counterfactual, but it's also it's impossible for me to refute. In the same way, I cannot refute that this bottle is keeping all the polar bears away. Right? I mean, do you see any polar bears? Right? I cannot prove the negative. And this is just it has now become.
Can we lock the doors just in case?
It has been wrapped into a much larger narrative, and so when they hear disinformation, they say, "Oh, you mean like Hunter laptop," which actually turned out to be true.
Yeah, well, we won't know, of course, Jonah Goldberg, because the whole point was to censor that out. You know, if people knew how, you know, they don't want anybody to make decisions based upon clear evidence out there. And the thing about we'll just go down the memory lane here. The laptop was in the FBI's hand in December of 2019. It was in their hands before Trump was even impeached the first time. It was about a week before they took the vote on that. It was like December 9th or something. So it was really close. It was closely tied. But they had it in their hands. And the FBI can do, the most powerful law enforcement agency in the world. Ha ha. Not really. They're just the most ideologically slanted and morally bankrupt group of individuals that are on the face. As a matter of fact, they just got their ass kicked in Michigan. But be that as it may, that's another side story. So yeah, if they wanted to, of course, the establishment protects its own. It protects itself. It doesn't allow, it doesn't want the people to know anything. I mean, can you imagine if Watergate had been just as, they'll say the Watergate cover-up. Well, this is 100 times what the Watergate was. This is easily 100 times what because this is now a sitting U.S. president's son who had been doing deals with Ukraine and deals with China and had all kinds of compromat on his computer that he actually put on there, which I'm hypothesizing was particularly left behind for a reason. Either he was told to do it or he did so in order to make sure that his father would run in the election. I don't know which one is the reason. Doesn't really matter. The thing is it was out there. I mean, either that or he is so tripping balls on cocaine all the time and meth and everything else that he doesn't, leaving his computer behind wasn't just by. I just don't think that it was by accident. I think it was done intentionally because it was. He never bothered to come back and get it, and so I think it was left there purely so that they could. And here's the thing: by doing so, and by then labeling it disinformation and calling it Russian disinformation, as 51 national security people did. They made it so then they could, though this information, not only it was an easier way to feel, I guess you could say it was one more way to make Biden sympathetic to the dupes that voted for him. This isn't to say Trump was substantially better now that we look at it in terms of the vaccines and whatnot, and the fact that Trump was not a Russian asset. Trump is is a average president in terms of his accomplishments, but average is much better than what it was under all the other ones. That being said, he's far from the ideal president. There's nobody that you can put in power, that position of power. And by the way, he isn't the most powerful man on the face of the earth. The president of the United States is controlled by the administrative state that's around him. This has become more and more true over the last, decades. So it stands to reason that anybody that's put into that position has to be vetted and has to be controlled by the people that run the agencies at the top, by the CIA or FBI or any of these DOJ. They all want to control the presidency. They no longer care about who's there. They only want to make sure that person doesn't change. It can't order anything that they don't like. They disregarded Trump's orders, by the way. They disregarded his policies. They decided they wanted it. They did things their own way, and they were they dared him to get rid of. Imagine, anytime he decided to get rid of somebody, for example, Vindman or John Bolton, there was a big media uproar. The media is controlling the United States of America in many cases, at least the people that want to be controlled by the media. And matter of fact, I'll get off on my soapbox and finish up with Tucker here and then go back to James Corbett. So when I say Tucker, and I know people will have their misgivings about that, but he's talking to Dr. Malone, Dr. Robert Malone, and I'll let them have their conversation because they're talking about Bobby Kennedy.
I have this cognitive dissonance where I realize how much my thinking has been skewed by reading the New York Times, the Washington Post.
Oh, it's so true. That's true for basically spend an afternoon with Bobby Kennedy Jr. Is he crazy?
Which I now consider him one of my friends.
Yeah, I do. I feel the same way. But if you read about Bobby Kennedy, it's he's a monster. He's a Hitler.
His family hates him.
No, he has 7 kids and they all love him. So actually, Bobby Kennedy's one of the best adjusted people I've ever met. I mean, but it's all lies. Actually, that's the truth.
So on Bobby, as I think. And I really enjoy interacting with him.
Me too.
I deeply respect him. I think if there's anybody that deserves the Nobel Peace Prize, he is the one.
Couldn't agree more.
But, think through, as I try to imagine for myself, if as a young man I had my father and my uncle brutally murdered, how damaged I would be. And I don't think I could have recovered.
No.
To become the person that he is.
And the guy was, at the age of 30, he was a drug addict. And he beat it himself and went on to lead this remarkably productive and, in my opinion, virtuous life. He really achieved something.
Yes.
Over, against horrible odds. And, I admire him.
The Monsanto lawsuit.
Yes.
Water keepers.
Exactly.
Children's health defense, fundamentally just trying to drive in... I think there's a good chance as a vaccinologist, I'm embarrassed now to learn what the actual data are about the efficacy of vaccines and what has really caused the decline in infectious disease in children. It's the data are quite clear. That declines basically parallels the improvement in sanitation prior to the implementation of the vaccines for almost all of these pediatric diseases. And if I live long enough, I suspect that we're going to see Bobby Kennedy totally vindicated.
So there's several things there. So you got the idea of misinformation, the media, there's the smears and whatever. Smearing, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who, as I mentioned, he lost his, his uncle and his father. Assassination. United States of America probably died on November 22nd, 1963. I'm going to just put that out there. When I say it died that day, that was the day that the administrative state, it wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald, certainly not him alone. It's a conspiracy, and the amount of evidence and the data and the reports that they've buried, and the fact that the CIA came up with this concept of conspiracy theory, and there's still people out there that are still suckerable enough to believe that, they think you're just a crazy crackpot. It's because they don't want to think they don't want to think too hard about what's really going on around them. They're incapable, or they certainly want to put enough blinders on to hide the fact that, Big Pharma is, buying spaces in medical journals to produce studies and results so that they can push all kinds of drugs on you that eventually are found to be unsafe and have killed people, caused heart attacks, or caused addiction at a level that causes people to commit suicide or go through massive depression. It's as Malone goes further there. he talks about vaccines, and he talks about the children and the studies that show basically if you have clean drinking water, just that simple element, cleanliness, clean water, a livable space, good food, believe it or not, most people will survive. Most people live. You don't need this vaccine bullshit. This vaccines have been a hustle for going back to Jonas Salk. I know there are people out there that'll scream and talk about how wonderful polio and measles and all these vaccines. There's books out there. As a matter of fact, Bobby Kennedy wrote a preface to one of them tied to the virus mania. And I know there'll be people out there that'll complain about that. There's a whole section in that about the AIDS virus and how poppers were involved and how drugs were involved. And I'm not saying that the virus cannot exist. There's a host of arguments that can be made about all kinds of things. The thing is we don't know how much of this stuff is being created for us in a lab. Cellular manipulation at this point. We know that this. There's a recent article I read tied to the fact that the H1N1 virus was manipulated in a lab. That's the one going back to the 70s. So you start looking at this and you start seeing what human manipulation is. We have people that are building and making things to cause damage in populations. And people will say, why would they ever do that? Wouldn't it come back to haunt them if it happened to take somebody from their life? If you're a sociopath or a psychopath, they're bored. These people enjoy causing chaos and malevolence. And if they are that talented as a scientist, the Mingala, and they've been doing this for God knows how long, don't you think that they prep for themselves and make sure they have an antidote or certainly know a way to deal with the disease? And in some respects, I'll tell you how these people think. So they know how to they know how the situation is set up for the virus that they've produced, and they'll have the antidote. But they may even want to get sick because it's a new feeling for them. Sometimes they like being vulnerable, and they'll get sympathy, and then they'll figure out, and then they'll make it. They know there's an incubation period. They know such and such about how the virus works or operates. They don't want to die, but they certainly want to get the sympathy. This is the mentality that they have at that high level of the spectrum of evil in intelligence and motivations. They don't operate like the rest of us. They don't operate on a normal frequency. For some reason, people think that they use their logic to try to explain people that are either hyper logical or people that are just hyper crazy. I mean, these people are out there. People keep on assigning their particular viewpoint of how they think things should logically work. They keep on thinking the world operates on a logic frequency that is tied to their logic frequency and based upon their logical experiences. They don't understand people at that end of the spectrum. They really don't. They don't have a cognitive, and they'll say, well, you don't know, do you? Actually, I kind of do. And this is where I'll cross over with another point that was made in this. So Bobby Kennedy was an addict at 30 years old. Okay. I was incarcerated at age 28 years old, and I was around people that are very highly malevolent, murderers, rapists, the whole kit and caboodle. We're talking about the whole bag of tricks. I was involved in these people for a substantial period of time, whether I was in a Marion County jail in Indianapolis, and later on I was at Westville. So I spent 2 years around these people. Enough to know that there are some very intelligent and very evil people inside. They were there for a reason. I know this. And very evil people that aren't very intelligent. So there's a whole spectrum of this. I was around people that were always hustlers. They always are looking for game or action. They're looking for excitement. Robert Hare created a thing called the hair test to test out antisocial personality disorder. And of course, amongst prisoners, there's a high prevalence of that. There's just this the rest of society doesn't have a very good understanding of this. They when they see malevolence, they say, "Ooh, look at how evil that is," and they can't believe it, and they act like this is new. They think that highly malevolent people can't exist in a three-piece suit, and then if they do think that, then they think, "Yeah, but they will never gain enough power to do the things they want to do." Bullshit. To not understand that there are people at the very high end of this spectrum. It doesn't matter if they're always smart or they have all the answers. They don't give a shit. A lot of times they don't care. They just like chaos. They love chaos. They love destruction of humanity. They love to see things burn. I mean, come on. There's people that pyromaniacs. They love. When I say they love to see things burn, the same way it can be said for they love to see things implode. They like to see humanity fight amongst itself for food and resources and money and voicing and the whole kit and caboodle. So when people act like they understand evil, or they don't think that it could ever rule the roost, or that the people at the very top really want to see them all dead, they really don't. They don't seem to have enough of a perspective to understand the calculus that these people are putting in place, and that they already have in place, and the fact that you're not aware of this yet, as I'm going to finish up with James Corbett, is only going to become more and more clear to you as time goes on. They're using a different modus operandi versus anything you've ever experienced in your entire worldview. You can base it upon history. You can go back to the Hitlers and the Stalins and all the evil people throughout history, Nero, whatever. You can go through, but right now, that's what you have. I mean, there's a reason why Hunter Biden, Jonah Goldberg, he's like, about changing the election. The election was just one aspect of this. If you're willing to create a coup and hide things from people to get what you want, I mean, what makes me think he won't go to the next level? If the ends, which is what these people are all driven by, and Jonah's a lower in IQ anyway, so he doesn't matter at all. But he's just one of the puppets that fall into this policy category. And that's all he is. He's just out there to spew bullshit. And of course, there's some logic to, when he says, I can't prove a negative. No, you can't prove that it will have any. You can't prove whether or not it would have changed the election. But we certainly can think back and think, if people had known, if people had known everything they needed to know about Biden and have paid attention to everything they were supposed to pay attention about, would they have voted for him? I don't think so. And that being said, we probably needed a third candidate. We don't need Trump. We don't need Biden. But then again, like I said, the agencies are going to come in and just run things the way they want to. And if they don't like you, well, they'll figure out a way to get rid of you. See, in the old days, they did it in a crude manner with JFK. They just did. That's what it was. Irrespective of what you think of him or what you think of his policies or whatever else, they got rid of him. This is as old as time. I mean, I'm reading over some old Roman Empire stuff, and there was periods of the Roman Empire where 60 or 70 years went by and no emperor or no leader, no Augustus Caesar or Caesar of the time didn't die of natural causes. They were all executed or found incapable and killed by their generals and whatnot. That was always going on back then. That was back in, and this is the early AD, like 200 and 300 AD. So we're talking 1700 years ago, which is, if you look at it from a standpoint of time, a human existence, that's pretty recent. I mean, if you think what humanity's been writing and doing stuff for about 10,000 years. So it's happened in the last most recent time. I mean, recordable history, that kind of stuff. So we'll go back to this real quickly.
Independence.net.
Perfectly.
My
Not only
apologies.
good, but it's encouraged. But if they want my work specifically, I am at corbettreport.com, CORBETT report.com. I know a lot of people used to know me from my YouTube channel, but that has since been deleted for thought crime. So now the way to go is directly through my website.
Yeah, and we did link back to that in our post. I was reminded reading your fifth generation warfare essay this morning, James, of a searing documentary on the Vietnam War from roughly 50 years ago called Hearts and Minds, which was a riff on General William Westmoreland's famous line about the U.S. Army having to win over Vietnamese hearts and minds. And in one of the most famous scenes in documentary history, we see Westmoreland uttering these words while the Agent Orange and napalm is raining down on Vietnamese families and children and women, and it's a horrific kind of moment in a very troubling documentary film. And I'm guessing the film is still available here and there, but and yet that was 50 years ago. I mean, you documented this in this analysis just how much more sophisticated these weapons, neuro weapons, biological weapons, etc. have become.
Yes, and may I just point out, firstly, that I think that is what William S. Lind and others were responding to, is the idea of the changeover from a military that was geared towards fighting and winning battles to one that is geared towards fighting and winning hearts and minds. That's, I believe, what they were gesturing to with fourth generation warfare, that it's a different type of military operation altogether. And secondly, yes, the advance in technology is extremely important because, as the authors of that fourth generation warfare piece from 1989 pointed out, it was primarily technological advancements that brought the evolution of different eras of warfare, and I think we can see that at work. World War I blew people's minds. Even long-term military strategists and planners, people who had developed plans for their entire careers, suddenly saw them all dashed off the board in a matter of months because this warfare looked nothing like warfare had ever looked before. World War II, similarly, did not look anything like warfare before. Wars like in Vietnam or Iraq or other counterinsurgency operations look nothing like the warfare before. And when and if there is a hot World War III between world powers, it will look nothing like what went before. So people have to understand the technological differences in this warfare. And one of the, I think, simplest ways to get your head around that is to watch a presentation by Dr. James Giordano, who is associated with a number of groups and universities and what have you, but he definitely has spent a lot of time in the neurological weapon sphere. And when you listen to him talk, I have the impression that there is at least a little bit of flim-flam in there, and that these weapons are not quite as developed as maybe the U.S. military would like them to be. But it at least gives you a sense of what they are working on and the potential power for these weapons to, if not literally control people like Manchurian candidate robots or something, at the very least to disrupt your cognitive processes long enough for an enemy to come in and do whatever they want to do to you. And in this case, again, enemy does not necessarily mean the Russian army or something. It could be our own forces. Again, depending on what way you're reading the way these battle lines are being drawn and in what context. As we just saw in Canada just a few short weeks ago, if you support the wrong political protest movement, you can and will be labeled as a national emergency threat, which then opens up the Pandora's box of literal military operations being waged against you, as the Canadian Armed Forces admitted to last year, saying that the pandemic presented a unique opportunity to refine their propaganda techniques on the Canadian citizens themselves. The military openly declared war on Canadians. I don't know if most Canadians noticed that, however.
Yeah, and here in the United States, the Department of Homeland Security, just under a month ago, issuing a new directive claiming that any misinformation or disinformation or malinformation, they invented it, even yet another term, particularly around two topics, the COVID-19 situation or election integrity, would be met with the label of domestic terrorist, which has been in the works for some time.
So, James, that's...
Sorry about that. Earlier, dead air. They always say you're not supposed to worry about that, but you get a feeling there between the Westmoreland hearts and minds. So that's where we're at. When you're dealing with people that are, even Westmoreland, I don't know enough about the dude, but I do remember, would you think that a military, somebody who's in the military that is doing this to civilian populations, and this is what's going on right now with Ukraine, we don't know what we don't know, but you can, between the Russians and the Ukrainians and the Nazis that work for the Ukrainians and the Russians and what they're working with China and the World Economic Forum and the UN and NATO and all these actors, do you not get the idea that they're working for something else? And then also you have the Shanghai lockdown that's going on, setting up a potentiality that, of course, Fauci's going to come back on and say, yeah, we need lockdown again to control this virus, again. And then I've read reports or read people's discussions about the evolution of this gain-of-function virus that was created in a lab and some of the markers and the things that were inserted into this particular virus, and as it evolves, it gives you a great deal of insight into the level of malevolence that these people are willing to go to get what they want. And what I mean that is, they didn't leave any stone. They didn't leave anything to chance. They decided they wanted to create a chaos-making machine that will perpetually be re-rolled out, and it may very well cause all the things that they want. And they'll blame it on that. They'll say, well, if we had only locked down harder, if we'd only done this. But they've never worried about treatments. That's the key thing. They've never worried about preventative. And when I say prevent, that once you're infected, they haven't worried about that critical time period between the infection and, say, 5 days, the early treatment program. They've never worried about it. You notice they constantly ignore that. It's basically, we have to either stop you from getting the virus, which means we have to shut down entire societies and have you throw on masks and control and manipulate you, or once we get you to the hospital, we're going to jam this medicine in you that's highly expensive, or you must get a vaccine, and the vaccine that does not work, does not help you. People keep on being sold that, it prevents COVID or it lessens the symptoms. But you must take this vaccine, and billions are already, at least in the United States, 200 and some odd million have already taken it, sometimes 2 and 3 times. And don't get me wrong, there are people that were pushed in that direction, and it's terrible. They were manipulated or controlled or coerced. Another aspect of this whole thing is the coercion methods that they've used. But be that as it may, yeah. So this is very, very, very warfare-like against all of us, and we are in this war, and we're not, and this war is about us controlling our heart and our minds to get to a better understanding of of what humanity is, what it is that means to care about each other, what it is to compare about ourselves, so that we can be good for others, and to defeat these evil psychopaths that have no regard for human life, who constantly want to push these, cockamamie ideas, robotics. I've been in plants with robotics in them. A robot is a tool. It's a tool, but it operates on machinery operates on power, and you have to be able to produce that power, and you have to be able to. There's just a host of things that go along with it. The same way with AI. Are these going to be? This idea. Do they want these things to be sentient? Of course they do. They see themselves as being the masters of this. They want to create something greater than themselves. That's the whole point with these top tier, psychopaths like Yuval. They think that they can somehow manage to control the human race if they have enough super bots. And believe me, they will be super bots. They will come and hover over you, lord over you like gods. That's what they want. They think they have a God complex inside their head, and they don't believe in God, so they believe they are gods. It's the same thing that's been going on since time immemorial. The original pharaohs back 5,000 years or whatever, they had to, in order to rule over everybody and enslave their entire populations, they had to present themselves as the superior beings above all. This hierarchy, this pyramid of situations, and of course, I'm sure there's communists out there that are more than happy. Like, well, then that's the reason why we need communism. We need everybody down. You never will get everybody down to the same level. These people will never. They use that as a hustle to keep you where you're at. It isn't about communism and capitalism and all this other shit. It's about you being motivated to do the right thing and having a moral backbone and a choice to not only respect humanity and respect animals, respect all this stuff, but also know what is. When you come to animals and stuff, the usefulness of respecting that there is we are the human race, and we are we are the operators of this planet, and we evolved beyond the capabilities of the other animals. But that doesn't mean that we should have a core and a backbone to know what is right and wrong towards each other. But that after a while, that's the reason why the laws are put into place. That's the reason why we have natural rights, irrespective of what Johnny Jackson thinks. But there's there's things that we have to work on. There's a reason why you should be seeking stability instead of this constant stupidity of pressing for change just because you think because you're younger and you know more, you should get what you want. And the older people are hustling you, like the Klaus Schwabs and the Larry Finks and the Bill Gateses that have managed to. People who adore those people or adorate those people, why do you adore these people? Why do you think or Elon Musk, another one, why do you think these people are so, above you? Why do you think that you should just adhere to whatever they say? They're not right about everything. Elon Musk has gone through many a woman. Obviously, he can't pick women. I'm not using that as the only thing, but I'm just saying that's just one example. It's like if he was a really, such a superstar of intellect and getting involved in relationships, and I guess he has like 7 kids, you would think he would be able to learn how to have a stable relationship with one particular individual instead of jumping from woman to woman. And there are people out there. There's people out there like, they like that idea. They like the flirt around like a butterfly to go from one person to the next, or they're always chasing the bigger, better thing with money and power. They don't have any stability. They just enjoy They enjoy they enjoy excitement or the newness of things until it gets old, and then they just replace it. And they don't care how much damage they do to everything around them, as long as they're just happy with themselves. They're narcissistic. They don't think about anything but themselves. They don't even know how to operate inside the environment that they live in. They have no moral center, I guess is the best way to put it. And they'll be the ones that'll be most shocked when this thing touches off really to the most negative point. So I'm going to end it there. I'm going to play out actually one of my favorite pieces of music. So instead of the typical closeout music, I'm gonna play out to Genesis. It's called Los Endos. So here's the final piece of that. Yep, and thank you very much. Thanks for listening.